one of my great frustrations is you all believe in free markets. The free market should be replacing decades of failure with something that could succeed, right? And yet we see it in cities. Forget some of the cities we've talked about. Baltimore, okay, cities in the South. We just see Democrats who promise the same thing, bowing down to the teachers' unions, failure to deal with law and order, declaring their cities sanctuary cities. Okay, what would you say is the explanation for why the market hasn't offered a corrective alternative that voters could vote for? When,
Well,
but me just say, just take parents and education. Okay, parents overwhelmingly want school choice. Every time a city provides some opportunity for schools to go to magnet schools or charter schools or other alternatives, the parents line up, in droves and droves to say, I want my kid to have this opportunity. Every time there's a crime, and a lot of our crime is non-white on non-white. The community says, please help us. And yet you don't see the corrective very often in the last several decades. So what explains the market's failure to correct?
I just wanted to say that the markets are correcting also in a different mechanism, which is people are moving. And
Yeah,
that's a way of market correction.
yep,
People move to jurisdictions in which they prefer to live, and
absolutely.
liberals do the same, not just conservatives. And so that's why you have this massive geographic polarization today in the US, because you get, more left-wing individuals moving to places that are generally more left-wing, and you get more right-wing individuals moving to places that are more right-wing. And now you're seeing people move for educational choice. You're seeing people move for safety, like we've had throughout history. But the markets did correct this last election. You saw a huge shift rightward, especially in cities, especially in democratic states. New York is the state that shifted right the most between 2020 and 2024. And so the question is, how bad does it have to get before the shift is enough to get 50% plus of the population, right? Because you saw this huge shift in New York in 4 years, despite the bleeding of population that likely would have voted right? So that is impressive.
Yeah, I
Can
think
any of
that's
you
a
name?
really great
Go
point.
ahead. Go ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that's a really great point. I mean, New York City's lost between 5 and 6% of its population since 2020. A lot of that was a function of dissatisfaction with exactly the kind of issues that, have been frustrating urban residents for, the last decade plus. In terms of, making it easier for some alternative political path. I mean, I think, the fact that it's just easier for people to move, is part of the explanation. But I also think, and this plays into a lot of the work that Rainey has done, the race issue still looms heavy. Why is it that you see Democrats continue to get away with what are clearly ineffective and in some cases really unpopular policies? Well, I think, a lot of people are afraid to stand up and push back against something where there's a lot of momentum behind it. I mean, 2020 was an incredible year for really bad criminal justice policies. And not just getting proposed, not just getting a hearing, but getting fast-tracked and put into place. In the year after George Floyd was killed in Minnesota, I think it was like 30 states passed like 140 different police and criminal justice reform bills just in that one year. That's an insane amount of movement. And so one of the things that Democrats have been really good at doing, particularly in American cities, is leveraging the race issue to, kind of threaten voters, really, right? I mean, but also, tie that to, their effort to build the national brand of for Republicans in the minds of voters. And, ultimately, even if an urban American voter agrees with a more conservative candidate on a particular issue, even one that means a lot to them, I think it ultimately is hard for them to get past all of the other stuff.
I'll also just,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I'd
go ahead,
also
Rainey.
just very quickly add that people are moving with their feet, but like Ralph just said, the race issue has been so off-putting to different ethnic minority groups throughout these cities, particularly New York City, that we've seen groups that have not engaged in political activism before, that have been characterized as typically low propensity voters, turn out in large droves. Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese Americans in New York City and San Francisco are now politically active in a way that they weren't, you could argue weren't a decade ago. And this is a direct result of Democratic policies on education, for example, that are racially discriminatory towards, them and their children. And so they're finally stepping up and saying, we want to, we're going to use our voice at the ballot box to sort of put this to rest. So I think people are moving away, but also you have voters that are now galvanized in a way that they weren't before.